The Federal Cold Case Repository is less a library and more a crypt dedicated to the ghosts of unfinished logic. It is situated 3 stories beneath the lowest level of the Central Archive complex, a location mandated not for secrecy, but for stability. Designed to endure structural shifts and catastrophic atmospheric events. Access requires biometric authentication through 3 separate checkpoints, each preceding a descent into cooler, denser air that carries the faint, oxidizing scent of aged paper and high-grade institutional sealant. Here, within the pressurized gloom, are stored the artifacts of definitive investigative failure. The core of this subterranean vault is lined with heavy, industrial shelving manufactured from low-maintenance, manganese-reinforced steel, calibrated to withstand prolonged exposure to humidity fluctuations. It is a place where silence is not respected, but mandated by the very density of the materials used in its construction. Within this archive, amongst thousands of files labeled simply inactive, reside 5 distinct dossiers. These folders are physically differentiated from the rest. They are encased in archival-quality polymer sleeves and bound with nylon cord, resting on a dedicated shelf behind an additional internal lockbox. These 5 files share a singular, chilling designation, stamped in heavy red ink across the brittle, yellowed manila, permanently sealed. This designation is not temporary. It does not imply awaiting new leads or pending technological breakthrough. It signifies institutional defeat, a recognition that every available avenue of deductive reasoning has been exhausted. And the fundamental truth remains irretrievable. These are the cases that shattered the expectations of empirical science, where physical evidence simply failed to correlate with any known mechanism of cause and effect. They are the objective proof that sometimes the world operates outside the parameters of human comprehension. And the answers are locked away forever, under layers of bureaucratic finality and cold, verifiable fact. To handle these dossiers is to feel the palpable weight of that finality, the oppressive stillness of questions that will never receive a response. The texture of the paper itself, cured by decades of isolation, feels cold to the touch, almost electrically neutral. As if the energy of the unanswered event had been completely drawn out. The first of these narratives, cataloged under the code designation Phantom Sky 86, concerns a disappearance so geometrically improbable that early investigators briefly entertained the possibility of spontaneous molecular disintegration. Known informally among the small circle of analysts who studied the residual reports as the Skyline Phantom. The event took place within the vertical expanse of a corporate monolithic tower, a structure of polished black granite and reflective blue glass that pierced the oppressive atmosphere of a major metropolis like a newly forged spear. The air inside these towers is always artificially maintained, smelling faintly of ozone and expensive cleaning agents.
A stark contrast to the grit and noise of the street 30 stories below.
The victim, a mid-level executive, was attending a small, late-night strategy meeting held in an executive suite spanning the 30th and 31st floors. The architecture of the building dictated that these floors were connected only by a private, enclosed, keycard-activated spiral staircase. Crafted from stainless steel and smoked glass, a structure designed to isolate the highest levels of command. The time of the disappearance was logged precisely between 1:47 a.m. and 1:55 a.m., according to meticulous internal clock records that monitored keycard usage and server activity within the adjacent data closet. Documentation confirms that the victim was seen ascending the spiral staircase toward the 31st floor, carrying a standard-issue leather briefcase. 3 minutes later, a security camera mounted discreetly in the ceiling tile of the 30th floor landing, designed to monitor the entryway, recorded the briefcase, now empty, resting neatly on the polished travertine floor. The briefcase showed no signs of being forced open. The combination lock was set to the default factory code. The victim, however, was gone. The primary puzzle was the geography of the structure itself. The 30th floor was secured by internal electronic locks, and the 31st floor's access was identically controlled. All external windows on both floors were thermally sealed, fixed units incapable of being opened. Constructed of 2-inch thick ballistic glass designed to resist extreme weather. There was no freight elevator serving only these 2 levels, and the primary building elevators were independently recorded as stationary. During the critical 8-minute window, forensics established that no physical struggle occurred. There was no scuffing on the polished marble, no displaced dust motes, and no signs of rapid bodily stress or chemical intervention. The sheer impossibility of passing from a controlled point on the 30th floor to a controlled point on the 31st floor, or vanishing entirely from the vertical shaft connecting them, defined the case. The only physical evidence recovered, and the piece that lent the narrative its unsettling poetry, was found 4 days later. This was during a detailed forensic sweep of the 31st floor executive lounge. Resting precisely on the inner ledge of the immense reflective window overlooking the glittering cityscape was a single, intricately folded origami crane. The paper used was a thick, textured stock, not commonly available, dyed a pale, aquatic blue. The precision of the folds was remarkable, almost machine-like in its angular perfection. It was balanced delicately on its wire-thin legs, presenting a silent, avian vigil over the lights below. The paper contained no trace DNA, no latent fingerprints, and no discernible chemical signature. This might link it to the victim or any external agent. It existed only as a perfectly formed object of impossible placement. It was a piece of silent, meticulous artistry left at the apex of an impossible crime. The signature of a transition that defied the known limits of physics and engineering. The file remained sealed because the geometry of the building refuted the existence of a viable exit. The second sealed case is designated Glacier Heist 7-4. It documents a theft committed against a high-altitude scientific installation. This crime remains unparalleled in its audacity and logistical impossibility. This location, known as Station Pinnacle, was established on a remote, wind-scoured plateau. It sits within the deepest reaches of the polar ice cap. It is accessible only by heavy-duty fixed-wing aircraft capable of specialized short-runway landings. The station was a small, prefabricated metal compound, secured to the underlying permafrost with titanium anchors. It was designed to house 5 researchers and store irreplaceable geological samples extracted from deep ice cores. The environment itself served as the primary, immutable security system. The air temperature rarely rose above -40°C, rendering prolonged external activity lethal without specialized, closed-circuit heating suits. The station was surrounded by an infinite expanse of crystalline snow, constantly reformed by scouring katabatic winds. This created a perfect, unbroken sheet of white. Any human or mechanized movement across this surface would leave clear, discernible tracks. These depressions would take days, if not weeks, to fill and smooth completely. The crime was discovered by a relief crew arriving after a 2-week period of radio silence enforced by a major geomagnetic storm. The documentation of the crime scene is chillingly objective. The external perimeter of the station, stretching for 1 kilometer in every direction, showed absolutely no disturbance. The snow was pristine, a pure, seamless field of diamond dust glittering under the weak, polarized light of the sun. There were no boot prints, no ski tracks, no snowmobile treads, and no landing marks from any unauthorized air traffic. The only tracks present were those of the 5 researchers who had been conducting their daily routines before the radio blackout. The station itself was found locked from the inside. The heavy, insulated steel security doors showed no pry marks, no evidence of explosive breach, and the sophisticated mechanical locking mechanisms were fully intact. The interior temperature remained stable, and the internal life support systems were operating normally. The 5 researchers were accounted for, found sedated but physically unharmed. They exhibited symptoms consistent with exposure to a fast-acting, non-traceable inhalant. What was missing were the core samples. These were not light, portable items. The missing inventory consisted of 32 stabilized deep ice cores. Each was approximately 6 feet in length and 8 inches in diameter, housed in heavily insulated, lead-lined containment tubes. The estimated combined weight of the missing material, including the specialized containers, exceeded 1,800 pounds. Moving this mass required significant machinery and time, especially through the narrow, high-security corridors of the station. The forensic reports outlined the central, insurmountable paradox. Something weighing nearly a ton was successfully extracted from a high-security, locked facility. It traversed a distance of unknown magnitude over terrain that records every disturbance with forensic fidelity. It was removed from the planet, all without leaving a single verifiable trace of entry, exit, or transport. The internal monitoring systems, designed to register sudden weight shifts or pressure changes in the storage vault, recorded nothing anomalous. The undisturbed snow surrounding Station Pinnacle remains the silent, baffling witness to an impossible vanishing act. The files are sealed not because the culprit is unknown, but because the mechanism of the crime is unknowable. It is defying the physics required for friction, mass, and movement within a fixed timeline. The third sealed file is designated Maritime Code 55. It details the complete disappearance of a solitary figure and the subsequent discovery of an unparalleled textual enigma. The lighthouse cipher is intrinsically linked to the relentless, eroding atmosphere of its setting. This granite beacon is situated on a jagged, wind-battered outcrop miles from the nearest mainland settlement. The location exists perpetually within a dense oceanic fog. The heavy, metallic smell of salt spray and ozone infiltrates every porous surface. The overwhelming sensory reality here is the sound, the continuous, mournful basso note of the foghorn. This is punctuated by the rhythmic crash of the Atlantic swells against the slick, dark rocks. The lighthouse keeper, a man known only for his meticulous adherence to schedule and his decades of dedicated service, was discovered missing during a routine supply drop in the late autumn. The light was active, turning its slow, precise revolution, and the complex machinery of the clockwork rotation mechanism was oiled and running perfectly. There was no sign of distress, struggle, or external foul play. The keeper's bed was neatly made, his dinner setting untouched on the small wooden table. The locus of the enigma was the heavy, circular iron door leading into the lamp chamber at the very apex of the tower. This door, designed to resist gale force winds and the corrosion of the salt air, was found slightly ajar, not fully open. It was resting perhaps 6 inches off the frame, creating a sliver of darkness in the intensely bright chamber. Investigators noted the distinct scrape mark on the stone floor, indicating the door had been moved rapidly, but not violently. Inside the lantern chamber, resting on the small slate writing desk where the keeper logged his nightly observations, was a journal. This was the core of the lighthouse cipher. The journal was bound in thick, water-marked paper and filled entirely with handwriting that was recognizably the keeper's, yet the contents were entirely alien. The script consisted of intricate non-alphabetic symbols, a complex mesh of geometric forms, interlocking arcs, and structured points that defied any known linguistic or mathematical system. Analysts ruled out existing ciphers, nautical coding, or even highly obscure classical languages. The symbols possessed a startling internal consistency, suggesting a rigid, highly developed grammar, but one that provided no Rosetta Stone for translation. Interspersed within the dense textual notations were complex mechanical diagrams. These were not rough sketches, but precise, three-dimensional engineering drawings detailing apparatuses that possessed an unnerving complexity. Vast gear trains that served no immediately apparent function. Closed-loop systems that violated basic thermodynamic principles, and schematics for energy transmission that bore no relation to contemporary electrical grids. The diagrams were meticulous, executed with the confidence of an experienced engineer. Yet the technology they described was fundamentally impossible, or at least impossibly advanced for the context. The physical evidence of the journal contradicted the professional life of the keeper, who was known to be a man of simple education, wholly dedicated to the maintenance of the optics and machinery of the light itself. The question became twofold. Who authored this impossible science, and how did the author vanish from a locked, isolated tower, leaving behind only the evidence of hyper-rational yet wholly incomprehensible thought? The sheer pressure of the isolation, the relentless hammering of the wind, and the pervasive fog lent a spectral quality to the event, leading to the sealing of the file. The investigation failed to place the keeper, or the source of the knowledge he recorded, into any measurable reality. Case number 4, Sealed Suburban 99, is perhaps the most psychologically distressing of the 5, defined by an overwhelming sense of intentional, pathological order. The silent witness took place in the bright, predictable monotony of a quiet suburban enclave, a neighborhood of manicured lawns, identical mailboxes, and houses painted in pastel hues. The atmosphere was one of stifling, sunlit normality, which only amplified the horror of the underlying event. The incident was reported as an apparent abduction. A woman vanished from her home between the hours of 10 a.m. and 11:30 a.m. on a Tuesday morning. There were no witnesses, no sounds of struggle reported by the immediate neighbors, and the exterior of the dwelling showed no signs of forced entry. The windows were secured, and the deadbolt on the front door was engaged. The initial responding officers, trained to look for chaos and signs of confrontation, were instead met with a scene of unsettling, forensic tidiness. Every single object within the main living space had been arranged with a precision that bordered on the obsessive. In the kitchen, canned goods were stacked uniformly, labels facing forward, sorted by date of expiration. In the living room, throw blankets were folded into exact squares, resting on the edges of the sofa cushions. Books on the shelves were not merely aligned, they were grouped by color and height, creating a flawless gradient across the spines. Dust, normally a silent indicator of human habitation and activity, was non-existent, suggesting a cleaning regime conducted with surgical intensity. Immediately prior to, or during, the disappearance. The investigative report notes the specific tactile details of the scene, the geometric perfection of the magazine stack on the coffee table, all centered precisely on the wood grain. The way the ventilation slats on the air conditioning unit were adjusted to an identical 30-degree angle. The almost unnerving crispness of the edges of the fitted sheet on the master bed. This level of intentional order suggested not just preparation, but a cold, controlling methodology. The single, defiant anomaly became the focus of the entire investigation. A small porcelain figurine resting on the mantelpiece above the fireplace. The figurine depicted a shepherdess holding a lamb, delicate and fragile, rendered in pale blues and whites. Every other object in the house, from picture frames to coat hangers, was perfectly aligned, facing forward, adhering to a visual plane, dictated by the architecture of the room. This figurine, however, was placed precisely backward.
Its face, the innocent, vacant gaze of the ceramic shepherdess, was directed toward the stone of the chimney, offering its silent, blank back
to the room and any observer.
Forensics dedicated weeks to this single object.
The dusting and alignment of the entire home spoke to a complete mastery of the environment, suggesting the individual responsible had ample time and a deep-seated need for control. The deliberate reversal of the figurine was interpreted as a signature, a conscious, intentional breach of the perfection that framed the violent act of abduction.
It was a witness forced into silence, facing away from the scene it contained.
The significance of the backward placement could not be deciphered. Was it a signal to a distant watcher? A specific message intended for the victim? Or simply a final, aesthetic flourish by a disturbed mind? The absence of struggle, the lack of trace evidence beyond the overwhelming tidiness, and the impenetrable nature of the single deliberate misalignment proved fatal to the deductive process. The files were sealed because the psychological structure of the crime was too absolute, too controlled,
leaving no point of physical vulnerability for investigators to exploit.
The perpetrator vanished into the anonymity of suburban order, leaving behind only the chilling implication of total, silent command.
The fifth and final case, sealed under the code Desert Echo 31, chronicles a vehicle abandonment that is less a complex crime and more a pure, existential erasure. The desert road vanishing occurred along a stretch of highway traversing one of the most desolate and exposed regions of the American Southwest. The landscape here is defined by extremes, relentless solar intensity, vast empty horizons, and miles of cracked ochre asphalt that shimmer under the heat distortion. The smell is that of dry, sun-baked earth, hot rubber, and the metallic tang of dry heat. The vehicle, a mid-sized sedan of unremarkable vintage, was discovered by a state patrol unit conducting a routine sweep of the remote route. The car was not damaged. It had simply been pulled off the road and parked precisely parallel to the cracked shoulder line. The interior of the car was immediately striking in its stillness. It was coated, uniformly and thickly, with the fine, red, talcum-like dust endemic to the region. The layer of dust suggested the vehicle had been stationary for a significant period, likely days, if not weeks, before its discovery. The details of the internal setting provided the baffling context. The ignition keys were still hanging from the tumbler, positioned in the accessory setting. The passenger side window was rolled down exactly halfway, allowing the dust to settle evenly across the seats, the dashboard, and the steering wheel. A half-full plastic bottle of tepid water sat in the center console. Crucially, the sedan contained no personal identification, no wallet, and no mobile communications devices. The vehicle registration confirmed ownership to an individual who had embarked on a short, pre-planned trip across the region. The implication was that the occupant had intentionally stopped the car, left the keys, taken nothing of value, and walked away into the desert expanse. The immediate massive search effort, encompassing aerial reconnaissance and ground patrols trained in desert survival tracking, yielded nothing. The relentless sun and scouring wind quickly erase human traces in that environment. But the lack of a body, even years later, remains the insurmountable barrier. Investigators performed meticulous forensic mapping of the immediate vicinity, documenting the fine, granular layer of the dust inside the vehicle and the disturbed surface of the earth immediately outside the driver's side door. They established that one set of footprints, likely the occupants, led away from the vehicle and extended approximately 30 yards, before fading completely into the hard, sun-scorched earth where the dust layer grew thinner. There were no return tracks, no signs of a struggle near the car, and no indications of a secondary vehicle or pickup. The question posed by the desert road vanishing is one of physical dissolution. How does an adult human being, capable of leaving a set of identifiable prints, simply evaporate? In an environment where concealment is virtually impossible and water deprivation guarantees rapid, visible demise. The desert, with its profound silence and limitless horizon, consumed the individual completely, leaving behind only the evidence of a functioning machine, intentionally stopped and abandoned. There was no rational motivation established for the individual to discard all means of identification and self-preservation. Nor was there any physical mechanism discovered for their total, untraceable removal from an open, observational environment. The case was sealed because the sheer emptiness of the landscape provided no answers, allowing the conclusion that the individual had ceased to exist within the framework of traceable human movement. These 5 locked dossiers, the Skyline Phantom, the Lighthouse Cipher, the Glacier Heist, the Silent Witness, and the Desert Road Vanishing, represent the ultimate, objective failure of investigative procedure. They are the fixed points where human deduction collided with reality, and reality refused to yield a logical explanation. Each case is a testament to an event that occurred outside the verifiable parameters of physics, human capacity, or criminal motivation. The institution of the Federal Cold Case Repository treats these files with a reverent distance, acknowledging them as data points that highlight the limitations of empirical science. The designation "permanently sealed" serves as a bureaucratic admission that the truth is often not merely hidden, but irretrievable, residing outside the reach of evidence and reason. Deep within the subterranean vault, shielded by layers of concrete and steel, these yellowed folders rest in their cool isolation. They do not hold the names of villains or the narratives of clear-cut tragedies, but rather the heavy, silent documentation of impossibility. They are the archive's permanent, objective record of absolute investigative failure, locked away forever, undisturbed by the hope of future revelation, existing only as cold, factual proof that some questions are never meant to be answered. The only sound is the low, consistent hum of the vault's climate control system, preserving the paper, preserving the mystery, preserving the finality of the lock.